Good morning. Thank you for joining us. My name is Julie Floyd. I am the Operator Certification and Training Manager for the Office of Drinking Water. I'm pleased to welcome you to our webinar today on navigating the licensed Waterworks operator waiver law that is in effect. And we have Grant Cronenberg and Jane Nunn who will be bringing that information to you today. A few items for housekeeping purposes. If you would please keep your microphone muted and camera off. We will be recording this session. We'll be sending out the link to the recording and handouts about a week after the webinar. To zoom in and out on your slides, if you're not familiar with WebEx, there are plus and minus buttons at the top of the screen to zoom in and out. If you have questions, put them in the chat. Jane has already started our chat for us this morning, so you can find that through a little thought bubble in the bottom right of your screen. To receive contact hours for this session, I will be putting a link to a form at the end of the webinar in the chat, and that's only for those of you who are live here with us today. For the WebEx platform, again, use that mute button to keep yourself muted and stop your video. Those would be it should look like what's there next to that green check mark. And then you can see the chat bubble in the bottom right. With that, I will pass it over to Grant.
Thank you very much, Julie. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I'm Grant Cronenberg with the Office of Drinking Water, where I serve as the director for the Division of Compliance, Enforcement, and Policy. And we also, as Julie mentioned, have my colleague, Jane Nunn. If you want to introduce yourself, Jane.
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Jane Nunn, and I'm a Policy and Program Coordinator with the Office of Drinking Water, and I work in Compliance, Enforcement, and Policy with Grant Cronenberg.
So today's webinar on the licensed operator waiver is scheduled for an hour. To let you know up front, I expect we won't go the full hour, but we did want to give plenty of time for questions. So we're happy to roll along once the formal presentation is done, until we've answered all questions. Julie, if you can move to the next slide. So on July 1 of last year, a new law went into effect. You can find it. There's a hyperlink there, but you can find it at Title 32.1, Section 172.1 of the Code of Virginia. The law creates a requirement in the code for Waterworks to have a licensed operator who holds a license that is at least of the same class, if not a higher class, as the classification of the Waterworks. Now, before the law went into effect, there was and remains a licensed operator requirement in the Waterworks regulations related to operator attendance. But this new law that, again, went into effect July 1st of 2024, placed the requirement in the Code of Virginia. So that means it requires an action of the General Assembly in the future if there were to be any modification of the law. In addition to creating a statutory requirement to have a properly licensed operator of a waterworks, the law also allows for a temporary waiver of that licensed operator requirement in the event there's an unexpected vacancy in that licensed operator position. So that's what we're here to talk to you about today. What the temporary licensed operator waiver is, how a waterworks owner qualifies and continues to qualify for it, and also how it can be lost, how a waterworks owner can no longer qualify for the licensed operator waiver. We will also discuss some other options related to potential relaxation of operator requirements if a waterworks cannot obtain the benefit of the licensed operator waiver. You can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Like I mentioned, the temporary waiver is available if there's an unexpected vacancy in the licensed operator position at a waterworks. The law lists some specific examples of an unexpected vacancy and then includes a catch-all for similar causes of a vacancy. If the vacancy is not an unexpected vacancy that fits one of the specific examples, then the Office of Drinking Water will consider whether the reason given by the waterworks owner for the vacancy is similar to those causes specifically mentioned in the law. Now, in determining whether the vacancy qualifies for the waiver, ODW will ask whether the vacancy was unexpected and could not have been anticipated. An example of something that would not be an unexpected vacancy is, say, the retirement of a licensed operator for which significant notice was provided. So they provide notice well in advance of their retirement, and then they in fact go ahead and retire, and a vacancy is created at the time of their retirement, that would not be unexpected because there had been significant advance notice to the owner that there would be a coming vacancy. You can move to the next slide. So what qualifies as a vacancy? The waterworks owner must be seeking to hire a new properly licensed operator. So if a licensed operator leaves the waterworks and the owner is not seeking to fill the position, then there is not a vacancy for purposes of this law. Of course, many waterworks employ multiple licensed operators as necessary to cover shifts and provide adequate backup coverage. Those who are eligible to receive the benefit of the waiver if there is an unexpected vacancy that causes the waterworks to be unable to meet the operator attendance requirements. Of course, that waterworks owner would still need to meet all of the law's requirements to get the benefit of the licensed operator waiver. And I'll be going into the specifics on that in the coming slides. You can move to the next slide. So again, the requirements to qualify for the temporary waiver in the event of an unexpected vacancy. These requirements are very important, and these deadlines are strict in that they are set by the law. They are in the statute. So please make sure you're aware of them if an unexpected vacancy arises at your waterworks. I'll go through each of these four in a little more detail in the slides that follow, but first I just wanted to cover them as a group. So first, within 5 days of the vacancy, the waterworks owner has to notify ODW of another licensed operator who will be responsible for operations during the vacancy. So essentially, what licensed operator will be filling the shoes of the operator who left the position. And within 10 days of the vacancy, the owner has to provide ODW with a written hiring plan, getting a replacement operator with the necessary class of operator's license. So the 5-day requirement to provide notification of another licensed operator, that would be an operator of a lower class than the classification of the waterworks. And then within 10 days, present a written hiring plan to get a replacement operator that is of a sufficient class, at least the same class as the waterworks is. Number 3 there, implement that hiring plan diligently. And number 4, provide a monthly report to ODW on the implementation of the hiring plan and the progress that's being made towards actually hiring someone to fill the vacancy. Next slide, please. So dig each of those 4 requirements in a little more detail. Again, within 5 days of the vacancy, the waterworks owner must designate another operator. This must be a licensed operator, but of course the operator doesn't have to be of the same class as the classification of the waterworks. If they are of the same or higher class, then there's not a vacancy issue there. So for instance, if it's a class 3 waterworks, they could identify someone who's a class 4, 5, or 6 licensed operator as the temporary operator to meet the attendance obligation created, to meet the attendance obligation and fill that vacancy temporarily created by their prior operator having left unexpectedly. Again, Waterworks has multiple properly classed operators, and there's an unexpected vacancy related to one of those positions. The Waterworks owner can appoint a lower classed operator to fill the vacancy and to receive credit for operator attendance for the temporary operator who has been appointed. I will note on this requirement that we have had a few waterworks contact ODW since the law went into effect July 1 of 2024 to see if they qualify for the waiver. And we have had to tell them that they do not qualify because the 5 days had passed and ODW hadn't been informed of the temporary replacement operator. So again, this is a relatively short time frame between the time of the vacancy and the time to notify ODW of the temporary operator who will be handling the duties. And as a reminder, while this is not part of the new law, there continues to exist a requirement in the Waterworks regulations for a Waterworks owner to notify ODW within 24 hours that the Waterworks is without the required operator. So failing to provide that 24-hour notice does not disqualify the Waterworks owner from receiving the benefit of the waiver, but it would be an issue of non-compliance with the Waterworks regulation. So there is that other and still existing regulatory requirement for notification to ODW within 24 hours when a Waterworks is without the required operator to meet their regulatory obligations. Move to the next slide, please. So within 10 days of the vacancy, the Waterworks owner has to provide a written plan to hire a properly licensed operator to fill the vacancy. As noted on the slide, the plan is to show a good faith effort to state a hiring plan that is reasonably calculated to fill the vacancy. To put it in other words, Waterworks should put some time and thought into developing and writing out a hiring plan that the owner thinks will actually be successful in filling the expected vacancy. As an example of what I think ODW would consider not to be acceptable, I like to use a admittedly made up example of a hiring plan that just says, quote, stand outside the Waterworks and yell, Waterworks operator for hire. Now, that's obviously an extreme example, but hopefully makes the point that some thought needs to go into developing the plan, and the plan has to, again, be reasonably calculated to actually fill the vacancy. You can move to the next slide, please. So I've got the last two of those 4 statutory requirements listed here. Those 2 obligations are both ongoing in that you have to continue to satisfy the requirements to continue to receive the benefit of the licensed operator waiver. So they are to implement the hiring plan diligently and to provide ODW with a monthly report on the implementation and progress of the hiring plan. Diligent implementation of the hiring plan means the Waterworks owner is constantly working to hire someone in line with the hiring plan. So the Waterworks owner can't try hiring someone for a couple of weeks in accordance with the plan, then essentially give up and not make any efforts for several weeks. That would not be diligent implementation of the hiring plan. And then the last requirement there, number 4 on the slide, is to submit a monthly report on the implementation and progress of the hiring plan. The monthly report would explain what the Waterworks owner has done during the month to implement the hiring plan and efforts to fill the vacancy. So the monthly report can be submitted at any time during the month, and it must show continuous efforts to fill the vacancy in accordance with the hiring plan. The ODW field office is who a Waterworks owner would be interacting with when it comes to satisfying these requirements, including submission of their hiring plan and their monthly report. So the ODW field office could have questions about the efforts to hire an operator based on the monthly report. They might ask the Waterworks owner for documentation to determine whether the hiring plan is being implemented diligently. In summary, and going to the question of what to do if your Waterworks experiences a vacancy, contact your field office as soon as possible to let them know about the vacancy, give them information about the vacancy, including the reason for it and when it occurred, to make sure that the statutory requirements are met and that your Waterworks is eligible to receive the benefit of the licensed operator waiver. And then make sure that within 5 days of the vacancy occurring, you've informed ODW in writing of who is the licensed operator, who will be the designated temporary operator. Within 10 days of the vacancy occurring, provide ODW with that written hiring plan, and then implement that written hiring plan diligently and providing those required monthly reports to ODW on an ongoing basis until the vacancy is filled. If a Waterworks owner does not qualify for the waiver initially or at some point no longer qualifies for the waiver, ODW will notify the owner in writing, and the owner can request an administrative hearing to challenge that decision. So, for instance, if a owner believes that they have met the statutory requirements, that they have an unexpected vacancy, they provided timely notice of who the temporary operator, licensed operator is, of the within 10 days provided that hiring plan and has implemented the hiring plan in a diligent manner and has provided those monthly reports, and DW feels those have not been met and provides notice that either you did not qualify or that you no longer qualify for the waiver, you will have a chance for an administrative hearing to challenge that. So I just wanted to underline that fact. So now that I've discussed what the waiver is and how you can qualify for it, Jane is going to discuss some ways that a Waterworks could lose the waiver besides what I've discussed. And also we'll discuss some other options if a Waterworks does not qualify for the waiver. So take it away, Jane.
Okay, thank you, Grant. And can we have the next slide, please? All right, the waiver that you get is not necessarily permanent. It can be revoked for various different reasons. The statute says that the waiver can be revoked if continued operation under the waiver presents a public health threat due to statutory, regulatory, or permit violations. This means that any violation of the Public Water Supplies Law, which is the act that Virginia has, similar to the Safe Drinking Water Act, or a violation of the Waterworks regulations, or if a Waterworks has a violation of its operating permit. Those can all result in a revocation of the waiver if VDH determines that the violation threatens public health. Okay, we have the next slide, please. Now, if for some reason you don't qualify for the waiver, and usually it's because the Waterworks has missed that 5 days where they have to name a temporary operator, this does not mean that you are stuck with having to deal with not having sufficient operators. The two ways that you can get around this, the failure to qualify for the temporary waiver, is to one, go and request a variance. This is found in 12 VAC 5-590-140B, and it has been the traditional way in the past that Waterworks have been able to request a waiver of the operator requirements. There are 7 elements that are required under 140B, and I'll discuss those shortly. The other way is the new statute does permit a Waterworks to ask the Virginia Department of Health to reduce the operator attendance requirement, but it's not as simple as it sounds. So can we go ahead and go to the next slide, please? Now, as I mentioned, there are 7 required elements for the variance, and when a variance request is submitted to ODW, it has to be done in writing, and each one of these 7 elements have to be covered in that request. The first one is you have to have a citation to that regulation that you're requesting a variance around, and I've supplied that for you here. So that would be 12 VAC 5-590-461. The next thing you do is you have to add to describe the nature and duration of the variance requested. A lot of these variance requests that we've gotten have been somewhat open-ended. The Waterworks basically tries to figure out how long it will take to hire an operator of a sufficient class. Some of the variance requests that we've had in the past, we've given up to 18 months for Waterworks to hire a qualified operator. And then also they have to be able to provide relevant analytical water results from quality sampling. And this includes those tests that are pursuant to the Waterworks regulations, which I'm certain that everybody who's attending here that works for Waterworks is familiar with. The next is a statement of the hardship and also the anticipated impacts to public health and welfare if the variance were granted. This is just basically to ensure that there is not going to be any severe impact on public health. Within a certain amount, we understand that not having an operator of sufficient class can result in the possibility of risk to public health. And this is just to make sure that the owner is aware of those and has thought about what those impacts might be. And the next one is suggested conditions that might be imposed by the granting of a variance. And these would be those that would limit the detrimental impact on public health and welfare. These things are usually suggested or need to be suggested by the Waterworks as to what they believe are conditions that are fair to have VDH grant the waiver. There has frequently been a back and forth between the Waterworks and ODW as to the conditions to make sure that there's some consistency and to also make sure that public health is being protected adequately. And then for number 6, other information, if any, that the owner believes will help ODW in determining whether or not the request should be granted. And then number 7 is the state health commissioner is the one who actually grants the waiver. And so the state health commissioner may require additional information from the Waterworks before making that determination. So there may be a request from ODW going back to the Waterworks with additional information being requested by the state health commissioner. Okay, next slide, please. Now, for the request to VDH to reduce the attendance, we consider these on a case-by-case basis. We don't have any way of being able to just simply rubber stamp a request, because each waterworks is different and each situation is going to be different. So we look at each waterworks as an individual. We're also going to base that decision on the facts of that waterworks situation. A class 1 system with 2 operators who loses one may end up, because it's a surface water plant, then that will have a different set of concerns and criteria than a groundwater system that's also a class 1. So that's just an example. And there's also a list of criteria that you can find within the regulation. And I've got the citation there. And those things that VDH is going to be looking at are history, operational history of the waterworks, the type of treatment that the waterworks is providing to its source water, the facility capacity, and the hours of operation. The population served, is it like under 3,000? Is it going to be 50,000 or more? Those can be important to know. We also look at the type and reliability of the remote monitoring controls, alarms, and communications. And then we look at reliable staff communications. And then the last thing that we look at is the emergency response plan and procedures. Okay, can we have the next slide, please? Okay, that's all that I have right now. It's time for some questions and answers. I've noticed that there's a couple of questions that have been put into the chat. So the first one says, for a class 6 waterworks, does an operator in training qualify as temporary? Grant, you want to handle that one?
Yep, sure, happy to. No, it does not. So class 6 waterworks with the way the language is written, I think frankly can't take advantage of the licensed operator waiver, because the law requires that the other operator designated is a licensed operator. So if someone who has not yet received their license, perhaps they're in training, would not qualify, because they would not be a licensed operator. And so that would be an instance where some of those other solutions or possible solutions that Jane talked about might come into play, such as allowing for reduced operator attendance. So maybe a class 6 system, they have a sudden unexpected vacancy. Maybe they could find a contract operator. Maybe they can't find a contract operator who can come in often enough to meet the attendance requirement set forth. The default attendance requirement that's in the regulations, but perhaps they could come on a less frequent basis, and so the waterworks could request approval by ODW, reduced operator attendance requirement for that system. And again, that would be considered on a case-by-case basis whether to approve that.
Okay, and then another question that popped up. It says, is reduced attendance grant permanent or temporary? It's actually just a temporary waiver. So the statute itself does not specify a time limit, but it is effective because of the hiring plan and the diligence required in order to fill the position, that at some point the waiver itself would end. As we mentioned earlier, under the revocation of the waiver, if it takes a tremendous amount of time such that ODW is concerned about public health and the increased risk to public health because of the lack of a qualified operator, then that can come into play when it comes to determining whether or not a waiver should be revoked.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I guess if the question's about the reduced operator attendance that can be approved by VDH outside of the licensed operator waiver, I think that could be temporary or permanent depending upon the situation. So yeah, I think that would be considered also on a case-by-case basis if there would be any a specific length of time for the reduced operator attendance being approved, or if it would just be permanent as long as the Waterworks doesn't change its operations. Then for until otherwise notified, then it would be approved for reduced attendance. On the variance front, I'll just note and underline that variances are typically for a set period of time. So like their ODW in the past few years has issued a couple of variances for related to operator attendance and the classification of the operator in attendance. And those have been for a set period of time, say 12 months or 18 months to give the Waterworks some time to find that new operator can come in. But both those instances were before this new law went into effect.
Hey, does anybody have any questions? Julie has put some information in the chat on how to get contact hours. So if you're looking for contact hours, then please go to the chat and go to the bottom of it, and that'll give you a link to the form that you need to fill out, and it has to be done before 3 p.m. today. Okay, and then we have, I think, one final slide, which includes contact information for both Grant and I. So if you have any additional questions or want any additional information, then this is how you can reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to assist you with the temporary license operator waiver.
Yeah, please reach out if you have any questions, and we'll look at it and get back to you. And if need be, set up a call if there's something particular you want to discuss.
All right, last call for questions. If you have any, feel free to type them into the chat. And as Jane mentioned, the link for filling out a form to get contact hours is in the chat. So take opportunity to do that. Again, that's only for the folks who are with us today live on October 8th, 2025. So seeing no other questions, thank you, Jane. Thank you, Grant, for the webinar today. And we'll be sending out the recording here soon. Thank you, everybody.